Yo, welcome to another episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. This is a very special episode. I am still your host, Neil Horowitz. You can still hit me up on Twitter, NJH287, also on LinkedIn, website, dsmsports.net. But want to get right into it because this episode is nearly 10 years in the making, over 10 years actually, as we podcast today. The podcast has officially been on for over 10 years. Hard to believe. I was just a kid, basically, when this podcast started. Social media platforms have come and gone since. The space has continued to change so much. We'll have some more reflections on 10 years on this podcast, as well as on my social media platforms. But wanted to give you guys a really cool episode today. And I was so lucky, so privileged, so delighted to be able to have our guest on the podcast today. She is a true GOAT in the space. Whenever I ask for recommendations for social follows or for people to really learn from, to have on the podcast, her name comes up again and again. My guest on this special 10-year anniversary episode of the Digital Social Media Sports Podcast is the one and only Jess Smith. You may know her by her social media handle at WarJessEagle. She is the Vice President of Brand and Digital Strategy for Stewart-Haas Racing, has just a ton of good stops in her career. She is so thoughtful and articulate about the space, about how to connect the dots, about how to ascend on the social and digital pathway to where she is today as a senior leader in the brand space, continuing on her way up. Just such a delight to be able to talk to her, be able to learn from her. You're going to get so many good lessons, so much good insight. She is incredible at giving just things that are really practical pieces of advice, makes you think, makes your wheels turn about how to really go from strategy to execution and vice versa. Just a ton of good stuff. Get your notepad out. You're going to want to listen to this more than one time. Listen back to multiple portions of this interview. Listen up because here is Jess Smith of Stewart-Haas Racing. I am back with today's guest, and I cannot be more excited. She is one of the GOATs of the social media space and continues to do great things throughout the sports world. My guest on the podcast today is Jess Smith. She is the Vice President of Brand and Digital Strategy for Stewart-Haas Racing. And welcome to the podcast today, Jess.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So psyched to pick your brain. We could have been recording before we even got started, already exchanging insights and ideas. But before we get into the meat of our discussion, tell us about you. Tell us about your career path, your stops along the way, and how you got to where you are today, and any tips for folks that want to do what you do.
Yeah, so I've been in the sports and digital space for about 14 years now, not to date myself, but I always joke with the team that I was working in the space before Instagram was a thing. I was a student athlete at Auburn University. I ran track and field. So sports have always been a part of my life. And I feel like most athletes kind of go through this identity crisis as they're looking for the next step. What do you want to do? Sports were always kind of the natural answer for me. And so I went into work in sports marketing. Didn't know exactly what that looked like, to be honest. I just was like, I want to be in sports. I want to market somehow. I ended up at a small non-profit called the Atlanta Track Club. And it was probably the best first job I could have because I wore so many different hats. So I did all of our digital marketing at the time, websites, website redesign, social media, outreach coordination, kind of all kinds of things. And I quickly learned that digital is what I loved. Like I wanted to live, breathe it, absolutely loved it. And when I was looking to make a next step, I really just wanted something where I could hone in on the digital space. I was wearing so many different hats that I felt like I couldn't dive in. So eventually went on to the NCAA in a very specialized social media role, working across championship coverage. From there, I went to Under Armour on the brand side, and have since been on the team side at the Yankees, New York Rangers, and now Stewart-Haas Racing. So a bunch of different places throughout my career. All of them have been great stops and have kind of molded me in different ways. But my one piece of advice for someone when they're looking to get into sports is to not focus on the logo. I started out at an organization that the majority of people have no idea what it is. I've been able to pave my way. So my most favorite stops along the way, if you looked at my resume, were probably the ones you would least expect. So I think be open. There are a ton of different roles in the sports world, and don't chase logos. Chase opportunities that you can make the most of where you are.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, and I think all of us can remember either like a first internship or first job where you literally did have to do everything. And even early
Yeah.
on, when we started, like, I mean, I started a similar time that you did in social media space, and you had to do everything. You were the content person, you were the strategist, you were the analyst if that existed, you were the salesperson, like the marketing person. So like as you kind of started dipping your toe into this digital social area, did you like think, okay, do I have to really hone my creative skills? I have to get really good at creating content because you were the person that was creating content. I mean, some folks will have like, design teams and they help them in some ways, but like, how did you kind of start to focus your skill development as you came up through the game?
That's a great question. Well, when I started, I believe at the Atlanta Track Club, I don't even know if you could share photos on Twitter. It was
I don't
the
think so.
creative, the
Y
like
frog,
creative.
picking Y frog.
It was like so basic and the most like, and not in a bad way, but it was copywriting, right? Like that was originally what a lot of the creative output was. And then when I went to the NCA, that's when I feel like creative on the channel started to change. Facebook especially was getting more visual. I remember I created like a quote graphic at the time, and it seemed like that was like cutting edge, which is funny to think about now. But early on, because we had to wear so many different hats, when I look back at the creative, it was not elevated or not to brand standards at all. I had to get pretty scrappy. I don't have like a design background, so I was downloading apps like I don't know if it was like PicMonkey or like
Oh,
different
about to say
things
pick
like
monkey. Oh my gosh.
I don't know, whatever it was, like to design on the fly as simple as possible. I feel like my bread and butter has always been on more of the strategy side.
Yeah.
So as social teams started to grow and more roles became open where you weren't wearing all the hats. Like I definitely went the strategy route. But I'm thankful for those early experiences because it taught you to be scrappy. And I was able to really learn, I think, where my skill set was and where it wasn't, and allowed me to kind of follow into the strategy route.
Yeah. And like, how did you start to really wrap your head around where that strategy fit? I mean, I look back on my early roles and I'm like, if I knew what I knew now, like, good Lord, I'd be asking so many more questions. I'd be doing this, I'd be doing
Isn't
that.
that funny?
Yeah. I guess I
Yeah.
feel like everyone probably goes through that. But like, did you start to really think big picture early on? Because that's something I've always admired about you too, is that you really think in those ways and understand that these are all connected and there's a greater strategy at play here. Like, how did that come about for you? And was it an early thing or was it something you came to develop as you went on in your career?
I think that always evolves for all of us, right? Like I think if I sat here and told you I was always this like super strategic person and always knew how to connect the dots, and I'm not being honest. I think I've always had some more curiosity and wanting to ask questions and wanting to connect the dots a little bit more. I think my first role, because it was a broader marketing role, not just a social role, did embed in me early on that all the channels kind of need to work together, but not in this like super strategic
Yeah.
way, right? When I say I was like a 22-year-old kid, it wasn't like I was building these like huge strategic plans or anything. But I've always had a natural curiosity, and I think that kind of helped to flex my strategic muscles. I would say Under Armour was the first place where I felt like I was really pushed to connect the dots, and I
Mm.
had really great leadership. When you work in social, so many times you're kind of put in a corner. So you're like the social person and you're not really asked to flex different muscles. When I was at Under Armour, our social team was actually pretty small, compared, I think, to like a Nike or an Adidas or everything. So it was great because everyone had to help with big projects. And our VP of brand marketing was fantastic. And she pushed me to work on brand frameworks and larger campaign initiatives. And there was so much cross collaboration in an environment like Under Armour, because you're product driven. So you're
Yeah.
having a plan so far out that was a place for me where I was exposed to different types of thinking. I saw people who were truly strategic and they helped me flex. And I think that's where it really started clicking. Um, I don't know. I'm curious what you think. I think people naturally will lean more either super creative or a little bit more strategic, but I do think you have to be in environments that help you flex those more.
Yeah, and to have leaders that put you in those positions and will expose you to here's the thinking behind this. And
Yes.
it's really matured as an industry as well as we've gone on.
Yes.
where like there's a reason for this, and we have brand frameworks, and we have like brand documentation.
Yes.
And all goes
Yes.
together like that.
Well, that was the thing. And like at Under Armour, it was like everything was a deck. Like, everything had to be put to paper because it had to be like escalated above. And so that was, I think when you work in an environment like that, where you do have to have so much process, it helps you learn like how to articulate what you need, how to put plans, vision to paper, and really just pushes you to think more strategically. So
How does that start to color your idea of what success in these roles look like? I mean, to go back to where we started, like analytics weren't really a thing in our first jobs, I don't think.
no, yeah. I'm like, well, what does a report look like?
Yeah, and then as you go on, maybe to like NCAA, they have some softer goals. So it's very brand heavy. They want to sell tickets, sure, to their championships. But Under Armour, it's they very much, I'm sure, try to connect dots where they could to some degree, but it's also a heavy brand play as well because their brand is such a strong thing. So how did those day-to-day goals, those big picture goals, like were you even part of here's what our marketing is going to look like, here's what the sales are going to look like, and how social should be pushing toward go and buy or go to this website and buy or whatever?
Yeah, Under Armour, definitely. There were goals. So we were category based. And I worked on our women's category among other things, but that was my main focus. The nice thing about that structure is we all essentially report up to the women's GM, and they did a great job of bringing everyone together, everyone understanding the goals. We're all responsible for the success of the business. And I think that's what good leaders do, regardless of your role, whether you're in social, you're a copywriter, you're in analytics. Like if people don't understand the larger vision, then they're not going to be excited about the work. So every place has been different, right? Like some places I feel like are more goals to paper, like strict reviews every quarter, and others are softer. But I think that every organization I've been at, for the most part, has done a pretty good job of laying out clearly like what we're responsible, and trying at least to row in that direction.
Yeah, because I mean, there's something to be said. Like, okay, well, you want to hit certain number of impressions, certain number of video views. Like,
Yes.
there's ways to do that, but not every way is going to be the right way according to what we're trying to accomplish as a company.
It's so interesting. Like you live in the analytics world, so this is much more your bread and butter. Numbers are not always not my favorite. Important, but I like to dabble in a little more of the creative and strategy planning. But I think it's interesting with social numbers and reports, because so often organizations get caught up in like you have to hit cumulative X number of engagements a year, X number of impressions. Oh, we've got to beat this so-and-so team in our ranking.
Yeah.
Like we can play this number game all along. Do you want us to post 20,000 times at the X number of impressions? It doesn't mean that it's actually moving the needle. And so like it's hard. I feel like especially as a leader now, I try to balance that. Like I think reports and understanding of what's working is really important, but I don't want us to get so bogged down in are we hitting X number of impressions this year, and are they growing next year? Because there's so many variables, especially in sports, that I think we often chase metrics that don't matter. I would rather us focus up on truly the like higher level organizational goals. They get too much in the weeds of have we hit 10 million impressions, over the last 2 weeks.
And how do you go about balancing that art and science, like even in your current role with Sudas, and looking at like NASCAR content? If there's a crash or someone goes off the track, like it's gonna hit numbers, and it's gonna get a lot of reach and awareness, but it may not be as powerful as something that is like community related or behind the scenes with a driver or endearing the driver to a fan. So like, how do you balance that of like, okay, there's a certain level here where the intersection crosses, and like there's a net positive for this kind of content versus this other kind of content?
That's a great question. I think not all engagement is created equal. And so, one of the things we use Zoom as a platform from an analytics standpoint, and we tag content. And I think I always tell the team, there are certain things that we're going to have to tell the story about, or initiatives that we're going to have to talk about. It's probably not going to be the most engaging, but our job is to figure out how do we take it and improve engagement, and build upon it. And so I think knowing the purpose of it, to your point, there are some things that are core to the organization, core to our partners, core to values. And we have to do them. And our job is to figure out how to tell that story the best we can. It's not supposed to be the most engaging, but we need to make it as engaging as possible. And so I think just understanding that from a team standpoint. And I always tell the team, like, as long as we take care of the foundation, then those fun things that we know are going to pop and are kind of silly and maybe are more just for fan engagement, then we can do that. But I think it's just making sure that the team understands what the purpose of it. And even though it doesn't hit those engagements, there's still a ton of value to it.
Totally. Like there's something to be said about something that makes me laugh, and I might send it to my friend group, or something that really like touches my heart and I don't never forget, and it like really stays with me the rest of my life almost. And
yes. Yeah. You know, and I think on some things from an organizational standpoint, like if it is a community initiative, you have to chip away at that stuff. Like I think we get really tired of certain things long before other people do. And if an organization is really involved and giving back to youth, like eventually you tell that story enough that becomes a core part of who you are. So it's still impactful. It's just you have to look at it through a different lens.
Totally. So tell me about like going from Under Armour to the team side. First off, I guess there's a couple of ways I want to go down this route, but let's start with just learning a team, like especially you went to Yankees and Rangers up there in the Northeast, and those are very historic franchises. And you did not grow up in New York, I don't think.
No.
How do you drink through that fire hose of here's what this team means, here's why they're really generational fans and what's important to them, and here's how you can learn like what the brand should look like and like how we should tell these stories?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the Yankees and the Rangers are very different where I am now. You go into an organization like the New York Rangers and New York Yankees, like you're not coming in to change the brand. You're not changing the dynamic. The foundation is already there. So the biggest thing, it's actually funny, like most people, I don't know if most people realize this, but I'm like, if you quizzed me on sports stats, I would fail miserably. So please don't ask me any questions about rosters and stats and all that kind of stuff. Like I love the business more than I love sports. So it's actually when I walk into a new role, like I know baseball. I feel like everyone knows baseball, but I don't know baseball, if that makes sense. Hockey was like really new to me. And so it's hard because I feel like learning the in and out of sports. I obviously understand the foundations of baseball, but I'm not like rosters and all of that. All of that is new. And then I'm also trying to learn the brand. I think the biggest thing when you walk on, especially in the team though, is you have so many people who've been there for a long time, people that know the history, who have fans. It's really about listening and learning on those legacy brands. You're not coming there to change the story or change the brand direction. It's really your job to figure out what they stand for and how to unearth it. So I mean, a lot of that is through discovery with current employees, people that have been there a long time, and just asking the right questions, and then building a content strategy that ladders up to the brand foundation that is already there. And there are certain brands, right? I feel like there are other teams probably you could come in and maybe they've never thought about their brand, or the brand really isn't there. Like they don't have the same history and legacy. And you could probably come in and I don't say blow it up, but like help them be more intentional, but actually craft that. But the Yankees and the Rangers, like it's really just about bringing it to life. You're not going to come in and change any of that. The foundation is there.
And when you're thinking about like content strategy, content calendars, and building this out, I mean, even me being in the team side for some years, like you have a pretty set season. You know what the season's going to look like. You know that, especially like in hockey, we know that we're going to have Halloween every year. We know that we're going to have this every year.
It's like, so cyclical.
Yeah, it really is. Like, do you then intentionally like just try to beat the monotony, or like, hey, let's do this. This worked last year. Let's just do this slightly better than we did last year. And like, how do you balance those things?
It's so interesting. I was actually having this thought the other day. Like, I feel like one of the biggest challenges in sports is to break out of the cycle, because there's an off season, but it's not an off season and it's not long. And so I think it's very easy to get caught up in actually doing the same thing over and over again. And so really what I've found, and I would say this has come kind of later, I feel like SHR, I feel like is probably the first place where I feel like I've kind of gotten in a good rhythm, we've nailed it, but you have to plan. So if we're in 2023, we have to be planning for 2024 now for like a season. For like, let's just take NASCAR season, for example. So I think the biggest thing about being successful in sports from a content strategy standpoint, one is getting ahead. So you have to be able to, like, while the current season is going on, have a plan for the next season. That's important because in the off season, right, you've got media day that will eventually happen, like different opportunities for you to capture the bulk content. So you've got to be able to really lay out your content pillars, the episodes that you want to map out a plan for the following year. And so there are some seasons, of course, where I feel like we weren't ahead on certain things, and it probably became more cyclical, and we were flying by the seat of our pants. And then had seasons, and thankfully, I feel like I'm at a good place where it's there now, where it's like we know what it looks like to get ahead. We know what we need to do to make sure that we're not doing the same thing over and over again. But it takes very disciplined planning, and it's not easy when you're pulled a lot of different directions.
Yeah. Do you like build in reactivity? Like, does team performance affect things? Like new trades or free agent signings? Like, how do you make sure that, like, okay, we have our pillars, our North Star, but we also have to be ready to pivot on a dime in some capacities or some opportunities too as well?
Yeah, I feel like in sports, you actually have to plan for the unexpected. So like, when trades are, when that time when it's going to start to happen. So like, then you have to build all the templates and think about the different scenarios that could happen. I feel like you have to be anticipatory and plan for the things that might not happen. And so that's hard because sometimes you might put in work on something and you might not ever see the light of day. But if you don't plan for it, the team's going to be in not a good spot. So it's all about planning for what you can plan for and being prepared for the unexpected.
And there's value in that scenario planning too. Like, even if that content ends up in a folder of tears or whatever, like, you still went through the process. You asked the questions. You know what it looks like to prepare and execute that as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Tell me, as you got up in your career, like, how was that transition from being the button pusher, pushing send, to becoming a manager, to delegating more, and to trusting direct reports to execute the strategy?
Oh man, I feel like it's always hard for people when they step away from the keys. Like I've had this conversation with so many people. And I think it's hard for people in social because it becomes your like baby. The channels are like
part of your identity.
Yeah, you pour so much life into it. But for me, I absolutely love leading a team. And I think the biggest thing that I've always tried to remind myself is what it was like to be in their shoes. Candidly, letting go of the keys wasn't necessarily hard for me because I feel like I was at a place where I was ready to do that. And I knew in order to take the next step, it was necessary. You can't lead a team and also be like completely in the weeds. It's just not. And like, if you have a team around you and you're the one doing the majority of the publishing, then I feel like you need to do some self-reflection on that. It's just because it is like your job when you start managing a team is to empower them to do the work. But I always I love leading because I know what it's like to have been in their shoes. Like our generation, you and I talked about it. I feel like we were in it from the beginning. And so I know what it's like to feel bogged down in the day to day. I know what it's like to have a boss giving feedback on like small tactical things, and how annoying that can be. And so I always try to remind myself of what it's like to be in their shoes. The hardest part about really leading a team isn't stepping away from the channels, but I think that's those normal management things, like learning how to give feedback, learning how to motivate people, because none of us go through management training. And so just those, for me, it wasn't the social piece. It was tough, but just making sure that I'm the best leader that I can be and that I show up for them in the way that I want to show up.
What do you want to be those guiding like practices, and like, how do you balance a little bit of the macro and the micro? Like, okay, here's our North Star. Here's like how we want people to talk about us. Like, do you get to like here's the language we would be using in copy on Instagram. Like, how much do you get in the weeds of helping to guide them, but also just giving them the framework so that they can make decisions within that framework?
That's a great question. So at SHR, like we've actually built a social media playbook. It was a collaborative effort with everyone on our team. So it outlines everything from who we are as an organization and our content pillars, our platform strategy, our tone and voice. We channel our owner, Tony Stewart. So he's like an easy character to embody. And everyone's part of that process, which I feel like is important because they have buy-in. I'll get in the weeds with the team if they need it, but they have autonomy to write the copy and just go with it, right? Like I don't have to, I don't review those things unless they ask questions. And candidly, often when they come to me and say, hey, I have copy X, Y, and Z, I'm going to say, well, what do you think? Because they can make those decisions themselves. I do try to roll up my sleeve as a leader. So if we have a big team, but it's not a huge team. So like if someone needs a day off for a race weekend, like I publish probably 2 or 3 times a week or 2 or 3 times a year, but that's, that's about the extent of it. But really my job is to give them a framework, empower them. We don't have a crazy approval process. Like it's pretty fluid and fun. I just ask that they come to me if something is questionable, if they feel like they're pushing the edge, because at the end of the day, I'm responsible for all the work. And if we're going to push it, I want to have, I want to know because I'm going to have their backs no matter what. So, as a leader, like putting in that framework and that playbook, I feel like it's the most important thing because your team can run with it.
Totally.
I don't know. Did you early on in your roles have where people just, everything had to go through approval, or it was like just a process to get anything done?
Yeah. I mean, I in my early roles, I remember at least for the first couple months, I was literally emailing like every tweet to get approved.
Yeah, that is the definition of insanity. And it's so deflating.
Oh yeah, and it has a killing effect too, because then like you're gonna do less, you're gonna have less creativity.
Yes. That is something like I believe in process, but like I don't believe in process for the sake of process, or like process that just like feeds egos. Someone starts in a role like and they're learning the voice and tone. Sure, like you might want to see copy for a little bit, but like no, there's just no need for that type of process in the social space.
Well, especially as we've grown, as the industry has grown, and now we have so many more platforms like where you can't like, okay, this copy's going on Instagram stories, this copy's going to go here, this copy's going to go here. Like, it's not possible, it's not feasible to get everything.
It's exhausting. I also think like one of the things, and this is probably the hardest thing as a leader stepping away from the keys, is that no one will ever do the job exactly like you do it.
Yeah.
Like no one will ever. And I think you have to understand that, and you have to figure out the moments. Okay, where are the moments where I'm going to give feedback because it's important, or where am I just giving feedback because this is how I would have done it, and just how I would have done it doesn't mean that it's right. And so I think like letting go of some of those tendencies where like, well, I always did it this way, just because I did it that way doesn't mean it's right. And so giving myself that gut check is like was really important starting off, because everyone builds a type of style, I feel like, and everyone does things differently, and that's okay.
You almost have to like get not just comfortable, but almost welcome areas where that the person that you hired, or the person that's working underneath you, like knows better than you do, or like is more in tune with what's going on TikTok. And it's a scary feeling at first, but to be like, hey, I'm not the smartest person in the room when it comes to this subject.
Yes. Oh, 100%. That's also a big shift. I'm at the point now where I'm like old. Everyone on the team, they remind me every single day. They're much, much more hip than I am. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've definitely reached that point. But they have much better sense on pop culture and all that kind of stuff than I do. And like, I have to trust them, right? Like I might not quite understand the joke or the, the post, but as long as it's not pushing way outside the brand box, like I'm going to say yes. And I think that is the biggest thing is, so, especially as you move up, you're going to be a little bit more disconnected than you were. You have to learn how to trust the team and then let them do their thing.
How's like how do you not pivot necessarily, but make the brand flexible enough where you like I guess this is all a way to get at this trend of absurdist content of doing something that's so ridiculous that you can't help but get attention, even if that's whether that's
Yeah.
attention positive or negative. Like, do you just go, okay, well, TikTok is different or this platform is different, so I guess that's us on TikTok. How do you balance that
Yeah.
with like being who you want to be, but also understanding that some platforms are different?
That's a good question. TikTok for sure is the one where I'm like, we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I feel like if you don't push the envelope there, if you're not a little wacky, like that's a place where we're really trying to burst the NASCAR and even motorsports bubble. So our tone and what we post there is definitely different. But I would also say like my perspective on what fits within a brand box has evolved over the years. I feel like early on, like I was like overly strict. Like it was like,
Yeah.
brand above all else. Like if you're, well, I'm not saying this is my perspective of the Yankees, but if you're the Yankees, you can't have fun, like they're like held a certain way. And as evolved over the years, like I do believe there's a brand foundation and you have to do the work that matters. So you have to understand who you are. You have to understand your tone. You have to understand what you won't do. I think that's really important. Always outline of like what you won't do. But the media landscape has changed so much. Like people I feel like consume to take a break. It's entertainment that every brand needs to loosen up a little bit. You have to figure out what that like line is for you. The Canes are going to be very different than what the Rangers do, and that's expected, but both of them need to figure out like where's that fun side of my personality. And so for me, as long as we're taking care of our foundational stuff, if we're telling our partner stories, if we are telling our driver stories, the different pillars that we need to hit, we've taken care of the big moments, like our team can flex and have some fun. Like, it's silly examples, but like Sonoma, we race in Sonoma every year and they wanted to do like vines of SHR because they wanted to plant like wine country vines. Totally silly, off the wall, like, probably a little off tone of our normal stuff. Fans loved it though. And I think moments like that, as long as not everything is like super silly and over the top, it's good. Like people are multidimensional and I feel like brands can be too.
It's ultimately it is fun. Like we're all out here to have fun. Sports are serious.
Yeah.
Like we want to win, we want to compete, but
Yes.
it's fun.
Yeah. Yes. And I think actually your point on the sports side, like one thing that we always say, it's different for us at SHR because I feel like we actually have a really good, like Tony Stewart as our muse is like very easy and tangible. If you meet him off the track, he's actually like the most humble guy, hilarious, funny, like want to grab a beer with, like people gravitate towards him. On the track, super serious, fiery, like it is go time. And so I always tell the team, especially when it comes to competition, like when it comes to race day or if it came to game day, you have to reflect competition. We're not going to make jokes about performance. If our coaches, if our crew chiefs, if drivers, if players read it, they need to know that we're putting them in the best light, regardless of, performance. And so in the sports space, I feel like you do have to have a sense of like right time, right place. And there's definitely, in my mind, I think regardless of organization, probably a wrong place to make jokes.
That's a great way to put it, I think. And I guess to take the lens of a NASCAR team, like, and maybe give our listeners like a quick overview of team versus driver and how, and also then like how that affects the way that SHR tells its story. Because like, yes, you have the SHR brand, but you also have the individual drivers who have their own personalities and their own brands that they like. Is there an intermingling there? Is there like an intentional separation? Like, how do you guys balance that?
It's a really great question. I think NASCAR and motorsports is unlike, they call it stick and ball, which is a weird term until I got to motorsports, but it's so unlike stick and ball sports because you have individual teams within the team. So essentially Stewart-Haas Racing, we're a 6-car organization. We have 4 in the NASCAR Cup Series, which is pro. And then we have 2 in the Xfinity Series, which is more like the minor league. Motorsports is different from stick and ball in the sense that for so long, drivers and partners actually have driven the interest in the sport. So a driver retires, you might lose the majority of your fan base. You're rarely going to hear a NASCAR fan say, I'm a fan of Stewart Haas. They're often a fan of, let's say, Kevin Harvick. And then because of that, they're a Stewart Haas fan. And so it's hard. Like we've actually really trying to change that dynamic. When I stepped in here, actually, when I was interviewing for the role, I was talking to them, they kept talking about brands and they were actually talking about partnerships. And I was like, well, who's responsible for like defining what SHR is? Like, I don't know, you could be if you want to be. I was like, okay, well, here we go. Because for so long they had an incredible driver lineup. We have incredible partners and the affinity from a fan perspective with the drivers and the partners. And so there was really no need to think about the brand. That's changing on our sport. And I think that's a good thing, but it's definitely a balance for us because you have on the cup side, we have 4 teams within our team, different dynamics. They all operate differently. And we've got to figure out how do these drivers fit our mold? How do we ladder up to the brand? How do we get excited, not just about our drivers, but us as an organization? And it's a challenge because people care about the drivers more than they often care about the organization.
Yeah, no, it's a huge challenge. Like I look at I feel like F1, they have smaller teams, maybe it's a little bit easier where like people are, I'm a McLaren fan, I'm a Red Bull fan,
Yes.
or whatever, I'm a Mercedes fan.
Yeah.
But so like the aspiration, I guess, is that people will be an SHR fan throughout generations.
That is exactly it. Like that is the challenge that we're trying to solve. We need to build fan affinity for us as an organization because at the end of the day, like partners and drivers are going to come and go. And so that's been a huge undertaking the last 2 years, defining what we stand for, defining who we are, defining how our drivers fit that mold, and making sure that when like Kevin Harvick is retiring this year, when Kevin retires, people still want to root for us.
Yeah. And is that end up being like a collaboration with the drivers and their teams? Or are they doing their own thing oftentimes and you guys are piggyback? Like, how do you guys make sure that like Kevin Harvick has his own content priorities and his own team and his own partners, but is also like is more than willing to play with you guys because you make him look good, you help him create good content. Like, how does that work together?
I love one of the things that I love about working in NASCAR is it's the most down-to-earth sport that I've ever been part of. So I feel like drivers are so much in our fold. Our team helps craft driver positioning for them. So thinking about how they want to show up, we help them on the content side. We have candid conversations about that. They're definitely not going off and doing their own thing because like you said, and like we talked about, it's like drivers define so much of the brand. The brands are defined by the drivers. And so we've got to all work together. It can't be one driver over here and SHR position him a different way. None of us will be successful with that. So it's really important that we're all on the same page. We're all connected. And we're lucky that we have drivers that are bought into that.
So to take me through a few minutes later, Jess Smith of Stewart Haas Racing, I could seriously talk to you for hours. There's a race eventually that you'll have to get to or get ready for.
Yeah.
But like, take me through like the foundational content pillars. Like, how are those defined? What are those conversations like? Who has to be part of those conversations? How much do they change year to year? Like, when you actually are defining what that pie and those pillars look like, how does that play out?
It's a good question. So it's really our team that's responsible for that. And then we'll bring in, depending on the conversation, people on our partnership management team or a sales team because they have good ideas. But I actually don't think that pillars change year to year. The content and how that falls under the pillar change because you want to mix it up. But our content pillars are defined by our brand and our organization. So for example, one thing that we always say about ourselves is we're a bunch of racers. When I first got here, everyone was like, oh, we're just a bunch of racers. Like, yeah, I'm sure every race team says that. That just seems like a bunch of BS. Like, yeah. But when I dug into it, like what I actually learned is Tony, for example, like didn't grow up with money. He had to earn his ride. And he loves to race. You put him
Oh,
in
yeah.
anything and he like, yeah, and he's not just good at it, he wins, but like racing is in his DNA. It's all he wants to do. It's all he thinks about. And our organization, so we were founded by Gene Haas and Tony Stewart, and Gene had actually had a NASCAR team prior, and then he brought Tony on board. And when Tony joined the organization, he brought people who like had this racer's mentality, like live and breathe, and all they want to do is race. And so what I kind of unearthed was, oh, that seems like kind of just BS, like marketing speak. Everyone across the organization, like our fabricators are spending their weekends at Millbridge local dirt track, racing a dirt midget. Like it's like true to our DNA. So like bunch of racers is one of our pillars. Like we want to show up how all of our drivers, most of them race outside of NASCAR. They'll do dirt racing, they'll do modified. Kevin tonight is doing SRX. Like they love racing. So like that's going to show up. That pillar is never going to change. If it changes and it's not core to our DNA, but how we tell that story needs to change year to year. So that's kind of how I look about content pillars. When I think about that playbook, like we think about those 2 to 4, whatever's right for the organization, core stories you want to tell. For us, it's a bunch of racers. We want to own our attitude that stems from like Tony and his DNA, but it's really the entire organization. And we want to educate people about racing because we love racing so much. We want to share it with you. Those pillars probably won't change over the next 3 to 4 years, but the execution of it will. You might add 1 or 2. You might have 1 or 2 that kind of come in and out because sometimes priorities do shift a little bit. But I think that's a foundational thing about how you want to articulate your brand. And it's the execution, the creativity that's different.
Totally. And the best brands do like persist year to year. And the fact that, to your point, like you have that personification of your brand in Tony Stewart.
It's so, yeah, it's so easy. I'm like, oh, it's so perfect.
Take me into the revenue generation side of things. Like NASCAR, more than probably any other sport on earth, has the best sponsorship activations. The fans who like are actively fans who will literally support a brand because they're supporting their favorite.
They actually like the partners. It's like
totally. So like when it comes time to activate with a sponsor, like what are those conversations like? Do you guys have content that is earmarked for sponsors? Are you like collaborating with sponsors to say, here's what our idea is? What do you guys think? Like how's it come to play, and has it changed at all since you've been there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, partners are our lifeblood. And so it is extremely important for us to service our partners. We have awesome partners who are so much fun to work with. And I think the biggest thing, right, they're buying marketing platforms when they come on board with us. So you're not getting a logo slap. You're going to get an integrated marketing program that authentically, it sounds like marketing speak, but it's actually very true, like authentically connects with our fans, because as you said, our fans genuinely care about the partners. They know that without partners, the sport doesn't exist. So anytime we have a partner come on board, we always sit down with them. It's almost like a brief. We just want to learn, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your values? What are kind of your brand platforms? And then we'll ideate from there. I think there's 2 things that we always try to do. Cars are often the star in NASCAR programs. So paint schemes can transform in so many different ways. So I always say that like paint is a vehicle for activation. Our team, let's say like Busch Light is trying to promote a dog brew or Busch Peach or something like that. Our team's job is to figure out how to translate that car into storytelling. So it's not just about a paint scheme. It's about getting creative, how the content shows up during the week. And then when it comes to like larger integrated partner programs, it's really about finding those touch points where there's synergy. Sometimes it's something small in messaging. Sometimes it's much more deeper rooted values. And then our team always tries to come up with integrated content. You will rarely find, just a logo slap. Like we always try to be very intentional about how our brands come together. And that's important because if you are just broadcasting or just your channels feel like a sales space, fans are going to tune it out. And so we're lucky that our partners understand by creating content that feels authentic to our channels, but integrates them, it's a win for them.
Totally. And to your point, it does really matter in the NASCAR space because it really is
It's
so important.
yeah, it's so interesting because when I came to NASCAR, I didn't know much about the sport, and I feel like there's so many misconceptions. And I feel like you would be hard pressed to find another sport where the marketing is so, I don't want to say sophisticated, but it's complicated. Every single day I have to be thinking about how does our brand SHR show up? What are our drivers, how are drivers showing up? And then we have to be building as a team marketing programs from everything from Bush Light to Mahindra tractors to Mobile One. And it's not just, like one content series. Like often in stick and ball sports, you have like um a Bud Light Sully of the week, right? It's sold in,
Mhm.
it's done for the year. You don't have to think about it again. Like we have partners coming to us saying like, look, I need our tractor dealers more engaged. Like, how do we solve for that? I'm like, well, I never thought of thinking about, tractors and dealers, but here I am. And so the cool thing is like, we're almost like an agency to help solve their problems. And I think that in the sports marketing side, like NASCAR and motorsports is so highly underrated, because the partner side of it makes it fun and it always changes and it's complicated.
And last before here, just for just a share, we'll say I promise I won't keep
Oh,
you.
I'm okay. It's fine.
Uh, but like when you look at who the fan is of NASCAR, of SHR, of individual drivers, are you guys like saying, okay, well, we have the motorheads, we have the gearheads, whatever. We like they're going to be there. Let's go after the casual fan. Like in NASCAR as a sport, maybe different motor racing teams are going after different fan bases, based on their brand, based on their drivers. Like, how do you think about, or do you segment those fans? Do you think about them all as a collective, and we're going to make them fans of our brand, our content? I'm going on and on here, but like, how do you
Yeah.
think like of those individual fan bases and growing the overall pie as well?
That's awesome. It's a good question. It's funny. We were actually having this conversation this week as we're thinking about 2024, because there is this interesting shift in NASCAR where there's a lot of new teams that are coming in. So Pitbull owns a team called Trackhouse with Justin Marks. Michael Jordan owns a team, 2311. Like they're after this new fan that's never thought about racing. And there's actually, I believe through YouGov, the number is like 41 million like die-hard NASCAR fans, which is a pretty big number. And we were having this conversation this week that I think what actually separates us is that idea of that we are a bunch of racers. Like we can speak to people at a grassroots level. So I don't think that we're trying to pull in someone who has never thought about racing ever in their life. Um, we're trying to pull in the grassroots racing, someone that's watched F1 and got an interest in it. Like we're trying to talk to the motorsports enthusiast or the person that's on the outside, because that's what's core to our DNA. All of our drivers are really big on the grassroots racing. So when you think about that pie, you think about NASCAR. I think we have to be really intentional about who we are, or we'll dilute ourselves, and then we're competing against a bunch of noise and almost don't stand for anything. So of course we want to bring in casual fans, but I think that where we do our brand of service is focusing on those casual racing fans and trying to bring them into the fold.
No, it's really well articulated, and I love too in that sense, like the ascension of F1 and other racing sports, like is an opportunity for you guys, and
Yes.
instead of like something to be scared of.
Exactly. And our ownership group between Gene, so Gene owns an F1 team, Tony owns a drag racing team, a dirt team. Like our umbrella touches a lot of different motorsports, and motorsports is seeing this like really fun kind of uptick right now with F1. And so I think it is about trying to bring those casual fans, but be confident in who we are and the fact that there are still people that have an interest in motorsports, that we don't need to go like so far on the outside that it feels like it's just an absolute stretch.
Is the Cup Series ultimately like that's where your bread gets buttered, so to speak? Like, is anything Xfinity Truck Series, like is that just kind of like icing on the cake almost? Like, how much can you really put resources toward those teams?
That's hard. So, we have 6 cars between Cup and Xfinity, and while we have we have a big team. Like it is, you do spread your resources thin. But at the end of the day, our Xfinity program and our Cup program are both important, and we just have to find a way to balance that.
In some ways too, like I imagine some of the Xfinity drivers, they're younger, they are up and coming more, like, and maybe they're more down to try things with you and like get outside the box a little bit more.
Yes, yeah, they are. They're definitely younger, definitely, definitely open. No, it just depends on, I think that some of that will depend on storylines, right? Like what's going on with the driver, what's going on from a partner standpoint. And so we do have to balance that. Like we do all have limited resources. That's normal with any team. And so you do have to figure out how to prioritize, and you have to have those conversations. Okay, this week, what partners have special activations across Cup or Xfinity, right? That's series agnostic. Like we have to have those conversations. Are there any driver storylines? So if we're going to Las Vegas, which is Riley Herbst, he's one of our Xfinity drivers, his hometown, like we might lean more heavily into them. And so I think the biggest thing on that, when you're looking at a bunch of different priorities within an organization, is having the conversations and understanding those moments where you can flex, when you can say, okay, this isn't a priority this week because X, Y, and Z. And we have a weekly shot list, like prioritization meeting. And that's where we have those conversations on what are the partner storylines, what are the driver storylines, and we figure out what's priority.
Love it.
Not always easy, but
last one for our promise, and having the exposure to an MLB player, to an NHL player, to now NASCAR drivers who get it probably more than any other athlete, that like you are part of the sport, and the more that you do well on social, the more that you do well with partners, the better it is for all of us. Whereas I spent enough time in NHL dressing rooms where it's a lot of the same old one-liners, or they're very more reserved, generally speaking. I mean, that's changing to some degree with some players that are more outspoken now. But like how have you found that difference? Like, are these NASCAR drivers, like, are they more than willing to, not necessarily more than willing, but do they seem to get it? Do they seem to understand the power of their own social media as well as just being part of the content picture?
Yeah, I think so. I said this earlier, but I love working in NASCAR because it's the most like down to earth sport that I've ever been part of. So the cool thing is, like, we have drivers here that will stop by. Like we have one driver right now that's like really interested in reels, wants to make his own reels, and he'll stop by and ask the team questions. And you don't find that in any other sport. Of course, we have certain drivers that understand it more interested in it than others. That's natural, and you have different personalities, but they're engaged and they understand the importance of it from a business perspective. And I think the thing that I love the most is they actually look at our team for guidance, and they want that guidance, and they're open to the guidance. The sport just in itself understands what they need to do to drive things forward. Drivers are bought in, and I think the thing that's just so cool is they're just very down to earth. The biggest thing that I've learned is you just have to educate. You have to like tell them why it's important. We've tried really hard as an organization the last year to not just put in a request with drivers. Like, we want to give them why we're doing it. So we have brand positioning for them. We sat down and walked through brand positioning. So now they know when we have a content request, we're not doing it just because it's like fun and silly. We're doing it because it maps back to something more important. Kevin Harvick's retiring this year, and I don't know if you know Kevin, but he'll be a future Hall of Famer. And he, right before his retirement was going to be announced, we were like, we really want to sit down with you and walk through a plan. Like, we had this like really robust plan with this platform that we wanted to do. And Kevin's really busy. He's got young kids. He's pulled in a million different directions. And candidly, I didn't know how much of it would be able to do. So we sat down with him and we walked through the plan, and him and his agent were like, yes. And the biggest thing that I can tell anyone working across an organization when you're working with athletes and drivers and C-suite is, if you can put forth a plan and articulate your why and look buttoned up, it's so much easier to get buy-in. We've executed, everything that we wanted to across Kevin's retirement because we were organized, we explained the why, and he bought in. And so I don't think if I've learned a ton here about getting buy-in from athletes, and I think organizations have to stop making excuses about they don't get it or they don't want to do it and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's part of the job for any athlete at any organization, and you have to explain the why. And it's our job to be as buttoned up as possible and make the ask as easy as possible. And then I think it's much easier to get buy-in.
Oh, it's so good. I was like literally like getting those chills or goosebumps, like really having with me in my own head of like, this is not like a give and take. It's a partnership. It's a collaboration. You guys are working.
Yes, that's it. And I think, and it's so funny because I feel like so often this sounds, and I think NASCAR is different because we have 6 drivers we work with. So it's a smaller smaller like team, but like you have to give them the seat at the table as well. Like, for lack of a better term, like you can't just be like, oh, I need this content, but they're busy. Like, that just seems like we have to do a better job as professionals of like giving them the bigger picture. It's just like you were asking on the strategy work. Like, we all want to understand the why. Like, well, so do the athletes that you work with. And I just think I look back at even other organizations and things I could have done differently, or we could have done differently as teams. And I'm like, gosh, so often in the social space, we move that we don't take the time to really like explain why we're doing things.
I'm like having my own flashbacks now of like,
yeah.
A phone like, can you say this?
Yes.
Even your own voice.
And it's not like everything is always this like big to do, a driver retirement super different than another thing. But it's like, I do think sometimes we just move way too quickly, and it's like, forget that sometimes just even a simple articulation of like why it's important goes a long way.
Jess, this has been so good. We're going to have some more fun with you coming up in our pit stops segment. But first episode Shareable Stat coming up right now. So good being able to talk social, talk strategy, talk marketing and brand with Jess Smith of Stewart Haas Racing. Could really pick her brain all day. We're gonna have some more fun with her in the pit stops segment. Stick around for that because you're gonna get a lot more lessons and insights and some fun stories from Jess. But first, this episode's Shareable Stat. And this episode's Shareable Stat, while we could look back on 10 years of the podcast, episode's Shareable Stat comes from a recent report, a study actually done with a company called Vision Insights, looking at Major League Baseball in particular and their fandom. And the Shareable Stat I'm going to give for you today is kind of a different way of looking at fandom, a different way of parsing the stats, and that is 31%. 31% is the percentage of fans of Major League Baseball that are quote-unquote forever fans. And that is the highest among the 4 big leagues they looked at. They also looked at NFL, NBA, and NHL. NHL kind of was the lowest at 25%, so not that far off from 31%. NBA and NFL were at 30% and 29%. Respectively. But I bring this up not to say that MLB is killing it compared to those other leagues in terms of their fandom, but the idea of looking at stats a different way, of looking at really looking at what your goals and objectives are, and even talking with Jess about what they're trying to do to create fans of Stewart Haas Racing, that fans that will continue to be fans of SHR even when Kevin Harvick retires. But it's a way of looking at what are you trying to accomplish. Maybe you want to look at, did we grow year over year based on a given content pillar, like we talked about a little bit in the interview. Maybe you want to look at our fan retention. Are we getting people coming back to our platforms, to our app, to our website, to our social? Are you driving more engaged users, more unique users that are engaging with your content, that are watching? Maybe you're looking at video views that are going to completion instead of just the general 3-second or 30-second video views. Just start to really parse your success metrics and look at what are we actually trying to do here as an organization. In this case for the Shareable Stat, MLB, yes, they want to grow their overall fan pie, but when they can really create a generational fan, a quote-unquote forever fan, that is pretty darn meaningful and has a greater lifetime value than a flyby fan that just may watch 30 seconds of a video and never come back again. How can you make sure that you are focusing on the goals that matter? So take a step back sometimes. Yes, it can be easy to get seduced by the big numbers, the vanity metrics, the rankings compared to other teams or other leagues. But you know what your strategy is, you know what your strategic objectives are, you know what your content pillars are, and step back and make sure that you are measuring the right things and giving weight to the right things as well. So that's just a shareable stat, part of a bigger picture conversation to be sure. But again, that shareable stat is 31% of MLB fans are in the forever fans category. And that's highest among the NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB consortium of leagues that this study looked at. All right, that's just a shareable stat, but more importantly, stick around because we're going to have more fun, more insights, more conversation, and we get to hear who Jess Smith's social media all-star to follow is because, more often than not, she is the one that people are picking out. But stick around because here she is again, Jess Smith of Stewart-Haas Racing. I'm right back from this episode's shareable stat, and I'm joined once again by Jess Smith. She is the Vice President of Brand and Digital Strategy for Stewart-Haas Racing. Jess, you kicked ass. Driving, getting this race started. You won a couple stages. Are you now ready for a few pit stops?
I will do my best.
All right, number one, tell me whether it's a book or a podcast or an article or a piece of advice, just something that's stuck with you and has been meaningful to you throughout your life.
Actually, I just got a piece of advice. It was from my old boss at the Atlanta Track Club. Her and I have reconnected. She's actually doing some career coaching. And so her and I have reconnected on that. And we were working through just different things about managing teams and insecurities. And right, we all have kind of imposter syndrome. And she was like, in any situation where you doubt yourself, I want you to ask and take a moment, is that really true? And I know it sounds really silly and really simple, but it stuck with me because I feel like so often when you're navigating careers and difficult situations in work, we build up our own things in our head that actually aren't true, but we don't take the time to pause and work through it. So that's a piece of advice that I've gotten recently, to just stop, pause and ask yourself, are these thoughts that I have in your head really true? Am I making a bigger deal of it than it is? And so, I don't know, it was really powerful for me. And I'm going to try to practice it more.
Oh, that's great. I mean, that's even hit me home right now. Number two for you, Jess, tell me about starting social sport and starting to articulate these ideas and thoughts that you've had, throughout your career and just you're becoming someone that is thought of as a thought leader in the space. I mean, you're a semi-celebrity in the social media sports space, whether you know it or not.
I need to start writing more, man. It's been so long and I'm off my game. So that's a goal, hopefully within the next 6 months. But it's a funny story. I was actually I was working at the Atlanta Track Club, which is my first job. And I knew I loved digital, but I was wearing a lot of different hats, so I couldn't dive in. I had a friend that was working at an ad agency and he was talking about QR codes. And he said QR codes. And I honestly had no idea what he was talking about. No clue.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, if I don't know what he's talking about and I want to work in digital, how am I going to compete in this space? And because I was at a small organization, I didn't have anyone to help kind of teach me, which wasn't a fault of anyone else. There was no one else in digital. And so I was like, I've got to find a way to hold myself accountable. So I started writing as a way to learn, and to kind of analyze the space myself. And that's how it started. The rest is kind of history, but it's really an accountability thing for me. And it all started because I had no idea what a QR code was.
I love that anecdote. I mean, it's funny too. I was trying not to laugh when you said QR code because I remember in 2010, 2011, whatever, when
Yes.
codes were this is the next big thing, and then they went away for 10 years, and then now they're everywhere again.
Oh yes, that I never would have predicted. Yeah, it's yes.
A quick tangent on that too. Have you found being in these digital roles, especially now where you are, oftentimes the digital person seems to be the default for when there's new technology comes out. Hey, Jess, what do you know about Web3? Or what do we know about blockchain? What should we know about NFTs? What should we know about metaverse? Do you find that is that something that you just kind of accept that the digital person is supposed to be on top of all these new technologies, whether they are a part of your day to day or not?
Yes and no. I think the one thing that I've learned is I think you always have to have a pulse on those things. You have to always understand what the landscape is doing, but you have to know where you when you need to dive in and when you just need to be like kind of on the surface. Um, it's always will be the nature of our job, but I have learned like when NFTs became big and hot, like I didn't cause a fire drill with the team, drop everything to try to launch NFTs. Like I think, like I think there's something to be said for knowing those moments where you do need to kind of drop everything and knowing the moments where you just need to kind of sit back and learn. But yeah, I think you do unfortunately have to accept it. But I think that's also what makes it fun. Like it's constantly changing. It keeps you on your toes. You just can't drive yourself crazy trying to go deep in everything because you'll eventually spread yourself way too thin.
Yeah, and I think it's more a feature than a bug of these roles because it forces you to
Yes,
stay on the pulse of things. We're already by nature being digital and social, you're generally going to be intellectually curious by nature, and so like you want to
exactly.
learn more about that stuff anyway.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right. And I think like I don't curiosity is like I think one of the biggest traits of being successful in social and digital. So yeah.
Number three for you, just tell me your favorite non-sports brand on social media and why.
Mine. Oh, the national parks.
Hell,
They're
Sparks and Wireless.
they're incredible. I'm also an outdoor enthusiast, so it speaks to my heart. But they do an incredible job. When I think about their mission, like I feel like they're meant to educate people on our spaces outdoor in the US. I don't feel like they're meant to be, I think they're supposed to be approachable, right? It's not like a Patagonia, like an intense outdoor brand. Like it's open parks, open access. And they do just such an incredible job of one, having a sense of humor, but they always like tie it back to an educational piece. It's relatable, it's funny, it's clever. The content actually isn't like, it's not like they're producing these long form and crazy videos, but just have a great tone and a great way of going about educating. And I feel like tying everything back up to what their mission is supposed to be. So have you
Fantastic.
seen their stuff?
Totally. I love
It's so good.
it's so good when you see a great clever ad and it's memorable, but it also like effectively conveys that message. Like that's like the
Yeah.
sweet spot, and I'm so
Yeah.
jealous
Yeah.
when I see that stuff. That's so good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Number four, if you just this is gonna be a tough one. The most memorable campaign or piece of content from your entire career so far.
um, my favorite has definitely been all of our stuff that we've done around the Kevin Harvick retirement campaign. So we have a whole umbrella. It's called Forever. And the reason why we went that way is because it kind of allows us to manifest. So we can throughout the season, we're telling all the different sides of Kevin Harvick. Kevin's kind of been this like misunderstood guy. And so we're going through all these chapters. Like this week, it's Forever a Dad. And so we're talking about all the different sides of Kevin as a dad. And then we've got kid content and the kids talking about him. And so I'm most proud of that work because I think in sports you have few moments that are like really, really impactful. Kevin has an incredible legacy with the way he came into the sport and the way he'll leave. He's been our DNA at Stewart Haas. And I think we've like truly done him justice. And it's like a truly like full integrated campaign. And I feel like we're giving fans and him the send off that he deserves. And it wasn't easy and it's been super robust. So that one for me is really, really, I'm really proud. And I'm proud of the organization because I think we've approached it very differently than other organizations would. Kevin was at RCR, Richard Childress Racing, before he came to Stewart Haas. And we're doing this long form series called Forever Defining. So there's all these different episodes that talk about Kevin through the eyes of people that know him best. And we've had all kinds of people in the sport come on and talk about him, everyone from like Dale Jr. to Richard Childress. We have competitors, and the content actually, most of it isn't about SHR. Like we've had moments, we've talked about the number 4 team, we'll talk about his championship down the road. There are episodes that talk about SHR, but a lot of it is just like Kevin and who he is. And for a lot of organizations, that would make them really uncomfortable. Like we're showing a owner of another race team in a video. But in my mind, Kevin he's critical to our DNA. And it's our job to send him off the right way. And it's helped our organization. Like, it's built Finifanity. They're so appreciative. And so I'm proud of it for a lot of different reasons. I think the organization bought into something big and unique, and we've actually been able to execute it, I feel like, the right way. So
So cool.
sorry, that was long.
Like 20 years from now, Kevin Hart will show his grandkids like, you want to know who I was as a driver and who I was as a person?
Yeah. And it's like, that's it exactly. And it's like so interesting because I've gotten really big on doing moments right in sports. Like, I feel like you only have so many like big moments, and those moments though like lend themselves to such good emotional storytelling. And you're right, like it's a historical piece, like a future Hall of Famer. So
And how much of those aspirational content pieces also helps like get buy-in from future drivers that want to work with you for content, you might work with the content, or for partners as well who see that and be like, oh wow, SHR knows what they're doing with content.
that is exactly it. And I think there's a lot of reasons why we got organizational buy-in, but you're right. Like, it's been an opportunity for our team to be able to flex their muscles and show what we're capable of. And that's really cool. Like, Dale Jr. has like shouted out and like reshared some of the videos like that, like, and like that, the team thinks that's so cool, but like that stuff has gone like such a long way. And I think so often we think about those things as black and white, like, and it's not. Like, you think about being able to have this portfolio of work that eventually we can show the numbers to future partners, like you said, to future drivers, and it shows our capabilities in a completely different way. It's obviously a selfish lens on it, but it is like it helps us in ways I think that not every organization would look at it that way.
Goes so far beyond like how many views a single video gets or whatever.
It does. Yeah, and it's allowed our creative team, to try different things, which is important. Like the editing, I mean, the way we think about how we approach videos, it's helped us a ton from a creative perspective. So a lot of benefits to that.
It'll help you recruit them when you go to hire the next creatives as well.
Yeah, look
Kind of
what
cool
we're gonna do.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, Jessica, have you put either maybe your fan hat on, maybe not. I hope you're not like the kick six game, or I don't know, I hope you were at the kick six game. Sorry. But if you were not there, number 5 is the most memorable game or sports event that you've ever been at, whether it's for work or as a fan. What's that game you close your eyes, you're like, I'm never gonna forget that?
Oh, it actually has to be my very first Auburn game. Not because of necessarily the game outcome or anything, but I was looking at a lot of different schools for on track, and I had no interest in Auburn because I just thought for some reason it was going to be a little too Southern for me. And I went to Auburn, Tennessee at night, and it was electric. And I'd never experienced anything like it. I'll probably never forget it. And it was the first school I visited, and I was like, I'm totally sold. Like, I never want to go anywhere ever again. So that one will probably always live with me. And then on the heartbreaking side, I did see Auburn in the Final Four. And unfortunately they lost, but that was also a pretty cool experience, even though it was a heartbreaker.
So just to be part of a school with that kind of tradition, to be able to go to like a game at Jordan Hare Stadium, like I'm jealous because I didn't get that experience in college. That's for sure. Number 6, just tell me, we talked a little about advice for someone that wants to get involved in sports, but for someone that's stepping into that leadership role, like what's a piece of advice you give to someone that is taking on a leadership responsibility?
Oh man. It's a good question. So much advice. One piece of advice. I think that you owe it to your team to give feedback, and feedback often. When I first stepped into management role, it felt like feedback sometimes was not, I don't want to say a negative thing, but I was like uncomfortable giving it. Yeah. And as I learned, like, if you don't give feedback, no one can read your mind. And so it's important for you to make sure that you give feedback, you give it often, you're direct. And you also have candid conversations about your style. Like, I'm going to give feedback. It's not, this is not, it's not a negative, it's a positive, like, because I'm trying to help you. So I think the first time you step into management, just learning to give feedback, learning your style is super important because it helps your team. And I feel like if you're not giving it, you're just doing a disservice to everyone. Um,
I like that because if you don't give it, then they're going to invent what you think about their work or their
yeah. And you also, when you lead a team, like you're responsible for the dynamics of the team. And let's say there is someone on the team who, just for an easy example, is cutting some slack for whatever reason, if you don't have the conversation with them, people eventually around them might get disgruntled. You also never know what's going on. So my approach when someone maybe hasn't been performing up to what I know that they can do, like I'm going to start with, hey, is everything okay? Like, I've noticed you seem disengaged. Like, I want to make sure that everything is okay. But you're responsible for the results and how everyone's running the same direction. And if you're not if you're not coaching your team, then you're not doing your job. And I think that's the thing that I've shifted to. It's not feedback, it's coaching. Like you're helping people. And I think that's really the number one job. And when you step into a role, have to learn how to get comfortable with that.
Really well articulated. And I've enjoyed over the years as you've shared pieces of leadership advice that as you've learned yourself and practice yourself. Yeah. It's really cool. So.
I actually have one more. And I think this is something that is hard. I really care about employees that are on the team. You have to learn how to have boundaries. So like you can care deeply about people who are important to you and not be friends. And I think like learning how to navigate those like healthy boundaries and those places where like you can give space for people to show up as they are. You can have moments, like all after the week, after a weekend, go over and talk about the weekend. They'll make some jokes about how I'm old and not hip. And we have those like human moments, but like you also have to know how to set those boundaries. As a first-time manager, I think that's always really hard.
I like that. Number 7. This is going to be an interesting one, I think. You've been exposed to NHL, to Major League Baseball, now to NASCAR. In brief, we can keep this lighthearted for the most part. Like, what are the differences between those fans? Like, MLB fans are like this, NHL fans are like this, NASCAR fans are like this, and
I don't know.
some differences as well. Like, what have you found through your tenures at those various places?
I don't know how to answer this, to be honest with you. Oh man, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I don't know how to answer this. NHL and NASCAR fans are more similar, I think, in the sense that the fan bases are both very passionate. I don't want to say it's niche, but it's a little less broad. And so I think there is definitely a certain passion. NASCAR fans, though, I will say, have this really an interest in the business. So like we talked about this because partners, like without partners, teams don't exist. They try to connect all these dots. So like they're very interested in the business side and like, I don't want to like not the rumors, but I don't know, all the theories that are going on, like more than anything I've ever seen from a holistic business standpoint. It's interesting. But I don't know, like sports fans are at the core the same. It's entertainment for them. It's a passion point for them. You've got over passionate fans and it's, I don't know.
What do you think about the future of fandom? Like, if like as we see these different entry points into being a fan now, like I think you think about MLB, like it's very generational. It's a national pastime. I'm a Padres fan. I was a Padres fan. Whereas like you might have people that I'm a fan of Kevin Harvick because I put a bet on him last year and it won for me. Or my fantasy team has this guy on it, therefore I'm a fan of this guy and his team now or her team. And like so, like how does that affect fandom and it's the emotional versus the just more fiscal investment, I guess.
I think you see generational on both sides. And I think especially in like NASCAR, because you have like Chase Elliott, Bill Elliott's dad drove, like there's that like generational aspect. So I think I don't think that's unique to just MLB.
No, totally. You see, I mean, pictures all the time of little kids at NASCAR races with their
Yeah.
earmuffs on. And
Yeah.
it's never.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I don't it's a interesting question. I think that honestly, probably the hardest part about that's different from with NHL and NASCAR than MLB is baseball is accessible. So a lot of people have played baseball at some point in their life. Like it's a sport that you can pick up a ball and a bat and like you've experienced it at some point. Hockey and motorsports is even less accessible than hockey. Like getting into racing is crazy expensive. And so your entry point into those sports, if you didn't play it, is hard. And I think especially in motorsports, like I don't think the younger generation has much of an interest in driving. And so us figuring out like it's not like they're going to pick up a dirt modified car and go around the local dirt track. Like how do we get someone who's never experienced it into the sport? I think hockey has a little bit of a challenge with that as well at a smaller level.
And I even gave the example earlier when we were just chatting offline, is how, like things changed for me when I went to my first NASCAR race, and that's hard to do if you live in the regions where there's our race.
Yes. Yes.
NASCAR is spreading. They're spreading more too. They're doing races at more exhibition races or whatnot in Chicago and LA,
Yes.
other parts of the country.
Yep.
All right, number 8 for you, Jess. I'm looking forward to this one because you are now in a food area that is very enticing to me. So I want to know if I come visit you.
Really?
Oh yeah, I love barbecue. So, what's the best meal you've had down there in North Carolina so far? And also, when you were up in New York, what was the best meal you had there? And also, where'd you get it? Both places. Where are we going?
Oh man. Um, I'm gonna break the rules a little bit here because I live in Charlotte. But the best meal I've had in the state of North Carolina is in Asheville.
Okay.
Which is only 2 hours. So I feel like we can.
Great city.
Asheville has, I think, the most underrated food scene in the entire country. And the Admiral is just this like old converted gas station. So very unpretentious vibes on the outside, but the best food. And I actually went well before I moved to North Carolina. And I typically don't like to go to the same restaurants over, but I've been like 14 times and it never disappoints. It's incredible.
What's the go-to there? Like, is it just like American food, like barbecue food?
So I don't eat much meat. So they always have like a rotating of like pastas and they do really great veggie dishes. But my husband loves meat and he gets like I don't know, like a huge sirloin, butter on top of it. The sides always rotate and like it has never disappointed. But it's like elevated American food.
Okay.
It's so good.
Asheville's a nice place to visit anyway too. So definitely make your way down there if you haven't been there.
Highly recommend. The food scene in Charlotte is good, but the food scene in Asheville is better.
How about New York?
New York is hard. I think my favorite dining experience in New York was probably at the Minetta Tavern. So I was like quintessential New York. But Little Mermaid is probably my favorite dish. They have a lobster roll that I really like.
Ooh. All right, I'm there. Let's do it.
Yeah. I miss New York and I miss the food scene there for sure.
Well, one scene that is probably better than New York City, at least, is the outdoor scene down there. But I know you mentioned you like outdoors, and I always love seeing pictures of you in nature, and some of the great places you visit. So tell me, like, the most memorable or favorite like hike or outdoor experience that you've had. Like, where was it, and what made it so memorable?
Oh, that's hard. My favorite actually is probably in New York, in the Adirondacks. Mm-hmm. So the Adirondacks are super, super rugged. I feel like out west you have like switchbacks. Mm-hmm. Like East Coast, like you just go straight up a mountain. And we climbed Mount Marcy, which is the highest peak in New York, and there was snow on the ground and it's above the tree lines. And it like took my breath away. And I feel like most people don't realize how beautiful the state of New York is. So I've had so many beautiful, great experiences out west, but like I kind of expected. Like you hear about how great the out west is, and New York itself. I think the state is beautiful outside of even just a city. And Mount Marcy and the Adirondacks is probably one of my favorite hikes. So
Like it. I'm gonna be Googling some pictures after to get
Yeah.
some scenery. That's awesome. Number 10, I'm gonna appeal to your Auburn love here. Which is gonna happen first or next, I guess, because some of it's already happened. Will Auburn men's or women's basketball win a national title, or will Auburn football hold up a Crystal Trophy?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to say that Bruce Pearl is going to give Auburn men's basketball a national championship.
There we go.
I feel like we're a basketball school right now. Not really, but I don't know. I like what Bruce has done with that program. I feel like there's a new energy around it. So
Definitely been fun to see what he's done with them.
yeah.
All right, Jess, you did awesome on your pit stops. You're now ready to hit the track again. But you're going to take over the podcast for a moment and tell us your social media all-star to follow. Just tell us who they are, what platform or platforms they're on, and why they're worth following.
So this is so hard for me. I was trying to give it some thought, and I'm like, there's so many good people out there. But there's a guy named John Steven Stansel. I believe he used to work in higher ed. He's maybe gotten some shout outs before. But I feel like for anyone that works in social, he's got a bit of like humor. He understands the landscape. He's always got some good like hot takes. And it's relatable. I feel like sometimes we all look for insights and stuff that we relate to. And he does a really good job, I feel like, from a social media perspective of just relating what it's like to be in someone's shoes that are in those roles.
Yeah, he's one of those people where it's like he's saying what everyone else is
Yes, yeah.
How about you just where we find you, as well as all things SHR on social and digital media?
We're Jess Eagle across all platforms. And then I do have a blog, socialandsport.com, but don't judge because I haven't written in a long time. So hopefully that kickstarts again one of these days. And then for Stuart Haas Racing, it's Stuart Haas Racing across all platforms. We're Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, all of that. So
check them out. Check out the Kevin Harvick series, among other content we're putting out. I cannot thank you enough for your time today. It's the 10-year anniversary of the podcast, and I cannot think of a better person to celebrate 10 years with. And it's been great following throughout your career and learning from you today.
Happy anniversary. Keep up the great work. And it's hard to keep things sustained, so that's extremely impressive.
Well, I appreciate that.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much again to Jess Smith, VP of Brand and Digital Strategy for Stuart Haas Racing, and truly a luminary in this space. Really appreciated her thoughtful insight, great answers to all the questions, great pieces of advice. I took a lot of notes. I hope you did too. Cannot thank her enough for everything she's done for this industry, and really helping to elevate everyone in it, and continuing to be able to learn from her and have more good conversations in the future. But that'll do it for this episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Thanks again for listening. Whether this is your first episode or you've been listening to episodes throughout the past 10 years, I'm delighted to be able to share this passion with you for this greater space of digital and social in the sports world. You can find me on Twitter at NJH287, still on Twitter, still calling it Twitter. LinkedIn, where I post more content. You can visit the website to see more posts, more content at dsmsports.net. And you can look back on the past 10 years of podcast episodes on your preferred podcast platform. Until next time, this is your host, Neil Horowitz, signing off for the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast.